Corin or Clayton joining us?
I just have finally checked it before. So they're both joining us. Is it Patrice? They're both joining us.
Fantastic. Thanks, Hayley.
Good morning, everyone.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm well.
Good, Sandia.
And how are you guys?
All good, thank you. How are you doing, Paula?
Am I a tad bit too early?
No, but everybody joins at like just on 9 o'clock. How are you, Corin?
Well and you, Colleen. Good to see you.
Nice to see you too.
How?
Hi, morning, everybody.
Morning, Patrice. How are you doing?
Good morning.
Great, thanks.
Good. I'm pleased to see some people are putting their cameras on. So you won't be talking to some circles, Hayley. There are some people that have the cameras on.
Grateful. I'd be grateful. Yeah, often we find that we are talking to circles on the screen. Yeah.
Guys, I don't know if you can hear this. There's some kind of disturbance. Almost seems like wind or somebody traveling in a car. Are you also hearing that, or is it just on my side?
Yeah, I am hearing that.
Yeah.
I'll just see who's not muted. It seems to have worked, hey, Sandia? Yeah. Okay, we're just giving it one more minute for people to join. And then, Corin, are you going to be starting off, or is Clayton?
I can do a quick intro for Hayley.
Okay.
And then we go straight into her, if that's
fantastic. Well, let's just give it a minute for because some more people are just joining. So just give it a minute and then we can start. How you doing, Waynes?
Hello, so good to hear your voice. I can't see your face.
How you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. We need to have a people meeting.
Absolutely. I was just saying it's fantastic we're not talking to circles today. There are some people that have been brave enough to put the cameras on.
Yes, no, I think we're over living as avatars now, so.
Absolutely. Okay, Corin, I'm going to hand over to you. I think people are just joining, but I think let's get going because I know we've got only got an hour with Hayley. So over to you, and I'll let people in as we're going.
okay. Thank you so much, Colleen. So welcome everybody to today's BoardWalk. We're very excited to have Dr. Hayley Haupt, one of our partners from our EY People Consulting Services based out of Johannesburg, presenting to you today. She's also our EY Africa Workforce Consulting Leader and has really been dynamic in this space, really placing humans at the center of everything that she does. And she's definitely a very, very passionate person, and you'll see it coming through in her presentation. And yeah, Hayley, I'm going to hand over to you because I think your presentation and who you are will speak for itself. Thanks so much, Hayley.
All right, thank you, Corin. Corin, can I just double check with you that you can see the presentation on the screen?
We can see it beautifully. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you really so much for the invitation. I know that I had to move this. The last time that I was scheduled to chat with you, I in fact lost my voice. I got laryngitis, and I've never had it in my life, but that was the first time. So first, to apologize, thank you again for your patience, and to thank you for having me with you today. So as Corin said, my name is Hayley Haupt, and I lead what we call our workforce advisory practice for Africa. What it means is that I work across the human capital value chain, and really we talk quite strongly to the humans at the center agenda for our clients across Africa. So today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about hybrid work, but I'd really like to anchor it really as an evolving proposition for organizations globally as they think about their businesses going forward and sustaining their businesses going forward. So the first slide, what I wanted to do is perhaps just create a little bit of context just around how we think about hybrid work in terms of what organizations are grappling with and what they're navigating today. I think you all know we've all gone through a lot of change, but what that's allowed us to do is to kind of look ahead, to think about a different lens and to think about, how we reframe our future. It's given us the opportunity to reframe our future, to think about new opportunities, to review our transformation plans in light of really an evolving customer experience, an evolving employee expectation and experience, and to think about how we realize the full potential of our people, technology, and innovation. And that's really how we think about transformation at EY, is leveraging the full potential of your people, technology, and innovation. So as we think about reframing that future, it's essential, we believe, that humans are placed at the center of that, and you then deploy your technology at speed and your innovation at scale. So understanding, people expectations in terms of how we reimagine work helps us then fuel that transformation journey. We really believe that it's an important component in terms of moving you from the S-curve that you're on today to jumping that S-curve onto the next S-curve and driving your sustainability and pivoting organizations as they move forward. So lots of information exists, and I've tried to distill out a couple of themes that we've seen coming through in the market around the future of work. I think that there's, probably I'm preaching or talking to the converted today, there are so many things that are changing in terms of, you know, societal, customer, employee behaviors and expectations. What we're seeing is that we have more expectations from a society perspective in terms of the role of government, the role of business, in terms of leaders and what we expect from them. We're seeing kind of fresh customer expectations, so this digital transactions moving to digital relationships. We're seeing employee expectations change. So what employees are valuing has really changed over this period, and so the asks are significantly different today than what they were a couple of months ago, or in fact a year and a half ago. So we've seen really a lot of the mega trends being accelerated, and what organizations have to think about is, so what does this mean for you and your business going forward? What does it mean in terms of managing your own people, their expectations, etc.? And that takes us to the second theme, which is around transformation. And, you know, it's coined that it's now, you know, a revolution and not an evolution. And I think many organizations have gone through that. This transformation at pace in an ever-shifting landscape, the ability to transform incrementally over a period of time, to be able to shift and respond to the changing landscape. And so that's a big trend that we're seeing in organizations that we've been working with. It's faster than we could have imagined. And what it requires is these new concepts of agility and resilience in order to continue to remain relevant. But the third one, I think, is really so important. And I think that, you know, in what I've experienced, the organizations that today feel strong and anchored, really that is driven by strong, visible and authentic leadership that models the behaviors and the ways of working that we want to espouse going forward. It's not an easy time for leaders. So there's this, you know, this ask to balance your organizational culture and your employee well-being with the need to make some bold, tough decisions in terms of remaining sustainable in terms of the future of your business. But what is going to be important for leaders is that as we adopt any form of hybrid work, whatever that looks like for your business, you no longer, I guess, have the safety of being in the office, which affords you some authority and proximity in terms of your people. So leaders are going to have to navigate different uncertainties, navigate the ecosystems differently, lead virtually, and acknowledge the need for different capabilities for leaders in taking your organizations on that journey and leading them from the front in a different way. But I think for me, that visible, authentic leadership is really going to be so important, and deliberate leadership, thoughtful leadership is really going to be so important going forward. I think what's been interesting is this broadening role of HR as a fourth point as we think about it going forward. While HR might have seemed like a very ring-fenced and siloed part of the business previously, what we've seen is that it's become more important. The role of HR has become much more digital, because HR now is about reinvigorating the employee experience, creating that seamless employee experience, and in fact engaging differently with your people and their families and the requirements for people to be productive and effective in their working environment while navigating a hybrid way of work. What we're seeing is that your resilience of your organization is now not only measured by your traditional financial metrics, but it looks at your people. It looks at culture metrics. It looks at enabling technology. We're seeing lots and lots of folks saying to us, well, how do we measure our people dashboard differently? How are we thinking about the people metrics that we're driving in terms of how they stack up against our organizational metrics, how they build up in terms of our financial metrics? So HR is playing a really very different role and having to find new ways of supporting employees and their families. And I think that will continue in the future as we think about hybrid work. And of course, then different things that HR has to think about in terms of, you know, running virtual talent cycles, rethinking their operating model in terms of being able to reinforce that and support those virtual talent cycles and the different support for people in your organization as you take it forward. And then, of course, I think, you know, the one that pops out in yellow, it's the one that we've all experienced, is this real theme around work as a place and an activity, and how for us, while that may have been separate before, it's really just merged and it's shifted to a kind of more digital, flexible way of working, new hybrid work models really becoming the norm. And how do organizations think about embracing that as they go forward? I think that what we've learned and what we've seen in our market, what we've seen in the global market, is that there is no one size fits all. It's about what's right for each organization and for each business on their own. And it's about thinking through not only what you want to do now around this, but how you pivot your organization to remain sustainable in the long term. And so the choices that we make today are around building a sustainable organization going forward by placing humans at the center and understanding what our people need and want in order to take the organization forward. I think that does not negate the need for the other organizational agenda to take preference and to be given prominence and priority. I think what this is saying to us is that we really now do need to consider the people components and how they help us drive the rest of that organization agenda. The slide is probably a little old. It was at a point in time, and I think we've seen lots move, particularly in our local markets, around choices that organizations have made. But really what it deems to represent is the different choices that organizations have made. We've seen some major global players say that they will return to prior ways of work, and everybody will return to the office. We've seen that in our market as well, that some organizations have made that choice. We've seen that most organizations that we've spoken to are really thinking about some form of hybrid work and what that looks like for them and how they continue to remain productive in a hybrid work environment. Others are going to engage in remote work going forward, and that's going to be standard and clear for them. But organizations are making different choices, and so those choices are based on, where they are in terms of their geography. It's based on their people, it's based on connectivity requirements, it's based on the ability for folks to work remotely. And so really global organizations with local presence in different markets are making different choices in different markets, simply because they must in terms of the markets that they reside in. Again, we've got to consider as organizations this balance really, really carefully in terms of what you seek to drive going forward. So as we think about it thematically, and you think about a hybrid work roadmap, I think we prioritize employee safety first and foremost, and that's been top of mind as we've navigated risk, as we continue in our country to navigate any risk around waves around the pandemic. Employee safety is of paramount importance, but also we think about the hybrid strategy and the choices that we need to make around that, the design choices we would make around that. But as you think about a strategy, you've also then got to build an employee experience and what that experience will look like going forward. Excuse me. And so we've built a little framework that for us has been most helpful in terms of thinking through strategy and a transformation journey and the areas of consideration. And they range from your customer and your employee experience that you wish to create going forward. So again, thinking about that sustainable business as you take it forward. It continues to think about employee well-being and emphasizing employee well-being. It considers capabilities and building skills for the future. And here it has to be both at an employee and a leadership level, making sure that we're all, well set and that we're getting some rounded capabilities in terms of navigating uncertainty in the future and continuing to work in a different way, not relying on the proximity that we might have had through working at the office full time. It then also looks at your physical and your digital presence, so the technology design, thinking through some of those things in terms of technology design, thinking collaboration mechanisms. If we think about when we first went into lockdown and the ways that we would collaborate and the evolution of those collaboration tools over a period, where some things worked really, really well at the start and were revolutionary because we were doing them before. After a period of time, we get the sense that we've got to push that a little bit more. We've got to stretch that. We've got to bring different thinking, different creative and design thinking into the mix in order to keep people engaged in a remote environment. And then, of course, there are impacts in terms of real estate, which really any hybrid work choice is going to have for organizations. And I'll touch on that a little bit as we go through the presentation. What I wanted to share with you was really some feedback in terms of an employee survey that we ran. It was a global survey, really the only one of its kind, 16,000 respondents across the globe with, in different parts of businesses, having different roles within the businesses. And of those 16,000 respondents, we got a lot of data that just helped us in terms of thinking through our own strategy, formulating our own structured thinking around some of this. What we see from employees is that most folks are satisfied in terms of where they are with their job. 7 out of 10, rating that at 76%. 93% likely to stay with their current employer for the following 12 months. So those are good stats. almost half of them thought that their company culture had evolved or gotten better over the period, which I think is something that has been tough for organizations to navigate. So that's, not a bad stat at all. And then, we had a 2/3 majority really saying that they thought their productivity could be accurately measured regardless of where they worked. And that then, feeds into what employees are saying around what they think might be important for them going forward. The next slide, I think, is an important one. So while we see that folks are satisfied with their work, while we see that they're comfortable to stay with their employers for the next 12 months, what we do see is that 9 out of 10 of them are seeking flexibility around where and when they work. And it comes up in the third bubble where they're talking about, 2 to 3 days a week post-pandemic working remotely. So that's a stat that's coming out really quite strongly. The other one that comes out really quite strongly is that 54% are likely to quit if they aren't offered the flexibility they seek. Now, it's clear then that flexibility is a large determinant for retention, and that has to be considered. So as organizations look at your hybrid model that has to support your commercial, financial, your other organizational goals, it has to be carefully balanced with these people components. And I think, particularly in a scarce skills market, that retention factor is one that one has to consider. And of course, we're seeing that in this great resignation. And so understanding what's important for employees, humans at the center, in conjunction with those other organizational goals is really going to be really very important going forward in order to remain sustainable. So looked at employees, understood some of what employees are saying in terms of some of the surveys that we've done. We also then looked at, so what does the market say? So what are some of our clients saying as they are thinking through a hybrid strategy, pardon me, and some of the components that they're bedding down in terms of that hybrid strategy. What we are seeing is that a number of folks have thought through that, and you can see that. So that's landing in market with various organizations already today talking through what their hybrid strategies are, how they're thinking about it. And while some have designed the components around it, what they think it's going to look like, still others are navigating how do we run this process ourselves? What does this mean for us in terms of running the process? We've now made the choice around, for example, a 2 to 3 day remote work component. What does that mean in terms of making sure that we are productive when we do co-locate? How do we continue to kind of mitigate some of the negative impacts? So organizational culture really comes up as an important component to think about from a lot of folks. How do we make sure that we don't dilute our organizational culture, that we don't create silos of team cultures within our organization that don't necessarily talk to the organizational culture? Lots of questions coming up around measuring productivity and performance and those kinds of things. So choices have been made around it, but now there are the nuts and bolts of the operations that need to be navigated and worked through as folks move forward. In terms of thinking about their hybrid strategy and their hybrid vision, there are a couple of things that have been critical for success and some of the missteps I've just highlighted on the slide there. First one, not starting with the vision and communicating that vision really takes you back to the start. So it must be a future fit. It needs to be an inclusive plan. One thing that was really quite important for us, and we see it time and time again, is working with the wrong data or not having the right data. And here I see this as killing two birds with one stone. As you're gathering data, what that also gives you the opportunity to do is bottom-up data, gives you the opportunity to also bring people along the journey with you. It helps you to engage with people, take your teams along, focus groups, business units, others on the journey with you. So it's not a retrospective fit, getting people to come with you on that journey. I think we've seen perhaps less and less of this, the confusion of remote and flexible work. So hybrid models promote flexibility. Remote work is one of those options for flexibility. And I think the fourth one we will see more and more of going forward is this assuming that what we have in terms of technology today will be fit for tomorrow's needs. And I think that we've got to continue to recognize that if we've learned anything is that we have to design to iterate, that things are changing all the time, that the envelope is being pushed all the time, and the expectations are greater and greater all the time in terms of any kind of remote work proposition. So those were just a couple of things that we learned from the market. And then we did a little bit of a deep dive in terms of financial services companies, and we did this across the globe, approximately 50. And I won't go into the top 3 that are in that little bucket because they talk to culture, inclusion, and wellness. And if you're making a hybrid choice, largely some of those should be taken care of through the office co-location pieces. they should address some of those things. But what we do see a lot emerging is this area of productive co-location and this trade-off between employee choice. So can I, go to the office on any day that I choose, versus this planning certainty that then helps you drive the agenda that you wish to drive when you bring people together at the office. And I might just share just a little bit of an anecdote here. When we ran in our business, we ran a bit of a pilot around hybrid work. And what was so interesting is that we almost take for granted or make some assumptions around what we expect from people in a certain environment. So we've worked in this environment before, we're going back to the same environment. We're just now saying come back 1 day a week, for example, and we expect that folks will be thinking about what's going to be the best way for me to work when I get back to the office. What we've learned is that people need for us to be quite explicit around behaviors, what it means when you're going to be at the office. Are you going to be teaming? There's no use going to the office if you're just going to sit in team sessions, back-to-back team sessions while your teammate sits next to you at the office. And while people, I think, intuitively know this, it was very clear that some of those things, we've got to be a little bit explicit around some of those things as we take our folks back to the office. So a bit of a reinduction, as it were. Another thing was a bit of a reinduction around ways of working. So we work in an open plan space. What was so interesting around the open plan space is that while we all understood that when we were on calls, when we were at the office, that there were certain behaviors that were going to be important, given that there were folks that were around you. Today, it's as if we've forgotten those behaviors. And so, it now requires your neighbor to kind of give you a little bit of a nudge and say, I'm actually trying to concentrate here. So choices need to be made around focused and concentrated work versus team engagement pieces. And what does this co-location give you? What are the choices you make around co-location? And I think that takes me quite nicely to the next slide. And so what I hope to demonstrate with this slide is a bit of a continuum around, so what does your office then mean for you? And that's one of the choices, I think probably the first choice that you've got to think about when you are designing that hybrid strategy. It then helps inform how many days you want folks at the office, what is that going to drive, etc. Because this is a strategic choice you make right up front. If you look at the continuum, what you see is that really on the far left, we talk about work as a place. So that's when you actually all are going to the office, and that's the only place that you're going to do work. On the other end of the spectrum, we talk about work as an activity. And there it means that you can work anywhere that you choose to work. Work can be performed anywhere. In the middle, we've got some different hybrid models, and each of these give different prominence to physical co-location and ways of working, and indeed the outcomes that you seek to drive through the hybrid model or the choice that you make along that continuum. So things like, are you going to be driven by team engagement, by problem solving? Is learning going to become quite important for you going forward? And how do you want to construct that learning? Some of the things that are emerging a lot are things like on-the-job coaching and mentorship. So, as over the last couple of years that we've been working in this remote fashion, we've taken on a whole host of new interns that have in fact never had exposure to office work. They've never had exposure to the kind of on-the-job coaching that I would have experienced growing up in the business. And what does that mean in terms of their developmental agenda, and what does that mean for our leaders of the future? So how are we going to navigate some of those? And so the hybrid choice we make must then reinforce or drive the outcomes that we seek to achieve. And so we need to be quite deliberate about the choices that we make around where one sits along this continuum. Now, if you look at the market, and if we looked at a bit of an analysis of public announcements, what we see is that really only 16% of organizations, if you look at the bubble sitting on the far left, only 16% are going to return to the office. So work as a place, that's where we're going to do our work. The large majority are going to be adopting some form of a hybrid model, and different extremes. So on the right, there's a work from anywhere extreme sitting at 19%, but the large majority kind of sitting in the middle. So a bit of a flexible hybrid model based on the outcomes that you're seeking to drive. So where does the flexibility lie? It could be centralized as flexibility in terms of number of days, but there are centralized principles that you drive throughout your business. or of course it could be team-based flexibility. So in other words, it's not driven from a central piece, but there's empowerment for your teams sitting in the different business units across your business. But really what we are seeing is that a large majority of organizations moving towards a flexible approach to work going forward. So I guess, how does this come alive? I just pulled together a snapshot of a couple of graphics from a recent EY article on future of work. I liked it because I think it cleverly depicts some of the choices that you need to make as organizations in order to respond to some of the challenges we've seen earlier. So thinking about, so what do your new ways of working look like? It looks at options for hybrid work, how you might address this productive co-location, productivity question, different forms of team scheduling. And what I think quite useful about this is just the ability to use communication, change management to help folks become comfortable with these ideas. So we've had, our people navigate great deals of stress, great deals of uncertainty, and what they are seeking at the minute is some degree of certainty as they go forward. And this just helps folks say, well, actually now I understand what my core hours are. We understand what the days are that we're returning to the office. We can pick a choice in terms of how we want to orchestrate or structure our team planning. And of course, those are individual organizational choices that you would make. But certainly, I think that it helps folks just, assimilate some of all of this change. So it helps them navigate the change journey that they're going to be going on and provide some certainty and clarity for them going forward. I think that this wrapper of clarity and safety is going to be a real important one for people as they navigate uncertainty, and they are looking for the leadership in their organizations to create some clarity for them as they move forward. All right, so lots of information, but once you've chosen that hybrid model, you also are designing an experience for your people. And we think about that experience in terms of three dimensions. So we call them bricks, bites, and behaviors. And I thought it might be a nice one to share because bricks is all about what we've spoken about now. What does the office look like for you? It's this network of spaces that you might create for your people so that they can work in any form of hybrid model. Bites is about this seamless integration. So this continuous building for the technology of the future, or building so that you are building in technology that you would require in the future. And then behaviors, which look at supporting your organizational culture. It looks at leadership, it looks at your ways of working, and it starts to kind of talk to some of what I was talking about that some of our pilots have surfaced for us in terms of the behaviors that we would need to define for our people going forward. So if we look at each of these just in a little more detail. So again, bricks, your network of spaces. So you've made your choice around where you want to sit on the continuum. Starts with your home and your office, and your home and the office and what that looks like. And then it looks at different spaces that you would use for collaboration versus individual work, which spaces might be good for creative thinking, focused thinking. What we are seeing is that, folks making choices around their offices then have to think about, so then what do the offices look like? If we believe that our offices are mainly for team engagement and for learning and for problem solving, then they need to be designed to facilitate that. And so folks making some choices around their real estate and what that looks like going forward. Again, other options like increased use of third-party spaces, hub and satellite concepts are emerging. And interestingly, we're seeing different models of this across different parts of our business across the globe. So, for example, in France, they are adopting completely a hub and satellite concept, and that's simply because public transport allows for that. It allows them to say we will have a centralized office, but in various parts of Paris, for example, we're going to have these satellite spaces where people can come together. They don't all necessarily need to go to the head office. Bites, I won't spend a lot of time on this because I think that this is something that we've all experienced as part of this journey of remote work, is the importance of technology, collaborative platforms, unified communication platforms. So, we've used Teams and Zooms. What we will continue to need going forward are places that allow us workplace chat, video meetings such as this one, file storage, including collaboration of files, all the things that we have in place at the minute. But the ask will continue to become, I guess, a stronger and stronger ask is that those collaboration platforms are continuing to facilitate the outcomes that we need for them to facilitate. And so you see different platforms trying different things, making it a little bit more interactive, trying to find ways to, have folks sitting around a fireplace, for example. So different ways of bringing that collaboration to bear, but also these are going to continue to need to be available on any form of device that we choose to use it on, be it an iPad, a phone, a tablet, a laptop. It really is going to have to be on any device that we need for it to be for it to manifest on, so that we can be productive in any location that we choose to be. And then I think, one that's really very important is around behaviors. So any form of adoption requires a change in behavior. And so while we can make all the choices around the places that we wish to work in this network of spaces, we can make all the choices around the technology that's going to help us take that forward. The adoption of the technology and the adoption of that flexible work is really what is going to direct the journey, as well as enable the hybrid choices that we've made. And so, important to define principally what those behaviors look like upfront. Important then to define what are the capabilities that we need in our workforce in order to enable productivity, to define and think through what those upskilling protocols are going to look like, and think about, so how do we define these behaviors in these shared spaces going forward. I shared with you earlier just some of the things that emerged from just a little pilot that we ran over a kind of 4-week period, and some of the things that bubbled to the surface around that. And what is clear is that folks will need a bit of a reinduction into any working space, and that also we have to acknowledge that many of them have never actually been inducted into our working space. So and we're seeing this with a lot of clients, is that the people have never been to the office. They don't know how to work differently at the office. They've always worked in a home space. So what are the things that we need to define for our people and help embed and build in our people as part of a change journey as we take it forward? So lots of information that I've given you, and I probably want to leave you with a couple of points just as a take home. I think aligning leadership around a common vision, really, really important, because whatever you decide to do, turn at the top becomes so important, and making sure that leadership is aligned is what creates this forward momentum around this common vision. We've got lots to learn from remote native organizations, and I think that's been done. That I think we've garnered and sourced a lot of information around that and built that into some of the choices that we made as organizations. I've said keep people at the center, and I think that's an important one. I think, just making sure that we think about that in conjunction with some of the other organizational goals that we've defined for ourselves. Feedback loop, what that gives you is proximity, intimacy with your people, employee listening. It allows for testing, it allows for iteration, it allows for you to build what is going to work for your organization and take your organization forward. Flexibility and options into your future fit operating model, embedding those flexibility and options into that. One of the nice ways to think about this is that once you've defined your model and your strategy, you've got to think about, so how do I flex that? And one of the ways that we think about flexing that is around employee personas, and we've done some work around defining what those are, and then making sure that what we've defined in terms of model helps us cater for the different personas that we have in our business. So builds a little bit of flex into that model. And then the last one is around your governance structures to embrace these new ways of working. And it's often the last one on our agenda, around rethinking our policies and the governance pieces that we need to build in place in order to help embrace some of those. And look, some of those may be around policies, some of those may just be around different processes in the organization. But of course, we've got to go back, evolve those, and then also make sure that communicating those form part of the change journey that we take our people on. And so I think for the last slide, I just wanted to kind of loop back to where we began, because there are a lot of tenets to consider in terms of hybrid work. When we look at the impact on the people and the organization, I think it's really important that we don't forget that this forms part of a bigger picture. And the bigger picture is about transformation of your business. It's about building for sustainability, and that process ultimately must place humans at the center while leveraging your technology really strongly and while building in an innovation capability that helps take you into the future. So thank you very much, everybody. That was a lot of information. I do hope that you have some questions and that I'm able to respond to them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hayley. That was really fantastic and really important that we think about this whole new way of working. I think we're all waking up to the fact it's not going to go back to same old, same old. So, so any questions for Hayley? Okay, Sarah.
Hi, Hayley. I'm Sarah Didiza from Bridgestone, and I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you for the effort you put in. It was really insightful. I wanted to ask if you see any differences in trends with the much younger millennials or Gen Zs coming in versus the slightly older group and their expectations around flexibility, travel, and other passions that we see emerging in that particular group.
Yeah, Sarah, that's a great question. So when I put through the when I put up some of the employee survey data that we have, there's a massive granularity of data that sits beneath that. And you're right, we do see some differences, particularly Gen Zs, millennials, and those have been in their roles for kind of 10 plus years. The first one that we see is around this retention matrix that I spoke about. So folks that have been in their careers for around 10 years or so, yes, flexibility is important and it will drive retention, less so than millennials. So we're seeing a stronger ask for flexibility from millennials and Gen Zs and that group of people. We're seeing a much more pronounced view around really quitting and moving if they don't get that flexibility going forward. And I think the other thing that we're seeing is just, you know, often you don't know what you don't know. So if you've not had the opportunity to have on-the-job coaching and mentoring, and if you've not, you know, you don't see the benefits of that, then you don't feel that you need it. And so there's a little bit of work to be done with that group of folks to kind of introduce them differently into a space where it, you know, there is on-the-job coaching, mentoring, nurturing in a way that helps them grow in their careers. But certainly there are some differences in terms of some of their responses. Is that helpful, Sarah?
No, that's great. Thank you. Really interesting to see that. And just a follow-up question on it is, would you say the definition of flexible work is now migrating much more to location rather than hours? So if I think back to the beginning of my career, flexible work was you can work 7 to 3, 8 to 4, 9 to 5. Whereas now we're seeing flexible work as being you can work in different locations, you can work different days of the week. Do you see the definition itself also changing because of the pandemic's impact?
It definitely has changed. It definitely. I think when we spoke flexible work, you know, at the start, the where and the when was different for different people, but it definitely is changing. So we're seeing, you know, I indicated that stat around folks looking for remote work or not being at the office 2 to 3 days a week. There is also stats on kind of where folks work and the fact that they want to be able to work from anywhere, any of the time. And also what we're seeing more and more emerging is around number of work week days. So I think you might have seen that there's a lot of chatter, I guess, in different circles around reducing the work week to 4 days and what that looks like. And a lot that I think organizations and employees are going to have to grapple with in terms of, we can't all take a Monday and a Friday off to have a 4-day week. So how is that going to manifest? How are we going to then diffuse that across different groups of people? So I definitely think it will continue to evolve and change. And that's why that building in that flexibility in your hybrid model is going to be important, because it won't mean the same thing for everybody. And those personas become important in terms of building that flex. Certainly.
Lamona.
Really, really interesting. Thank you.
Hi, hi Hayley. This is Lamona Raja from Cummins. Thank you so much for the presentation. Really great information. I'm curious to learn a little bit more about the inducting of employees in this new workplace. You mentioned, so does this apply to new joiners only, older employees, and what does that look like with this hybrid model and more flexible work?
So, Lamona, for us, we have taken a choice that will be for everybody. And so what we will do is build an induction protocol that runs across the business. And the reason for that is that we do believe, or we feel that our people have been remote and away from the office for a very long period of time. As I said, our pilots have certainly taught us a couple of things around behaviors, ways of work, how we engage with each other in an open workspace that we seem to all have almost forgotten. And so certainly, so what we've sought to do is to talk through, so what are the principles that drive our choices? What does that mean, and how does that manifest in terms of the behaviors? And then build out just a little mini induction program that helps folks just navigate returning to the office. And we've thought about different ways around doing that. So, you know, micro learning is a big thing at the minute. So what we've thought about are little kind of micro videos that help you navigate certain pieces at the office. That induction is not only about behaviors, but it's also about operations. So, you know, how do you use the printer again, for example? So those kinds of things we've kind of forgotten and we're going to relearn. So making it easier, creating a bit of a portal where it's, you know, creating a bit of a day in the life of graphic, which has the videos linked to it at various parts of it that help you just navigate. How do I navigate my day at the office? What are the things that I need to be thinking about a little bit differently? So, and then I think probably the third piece that I probably would raise is just then around this team engagement and ways of working. So if you are to go to the office, for us, it is around engaging with your people. It is around problem solving. It is around collaboration. There will be elements of learning associated with it. So that's what it means for us when we say our office will connect you. So, and if you are going to go to the office, it should be around team engagement. And so therefore, our expectation is that ahead of that, think about your diary, think about how you're managing your day so that in fact you are able to engage with your team. So it does require a little bit of planning. It requires our more senior managers to be thinking about how they plan with their teams when they go to the office so that the teams are getting the most that they can get from it. So there's this kind of on the ground learning and coaching and mentoring that's happening as part of this engagement and collaboration protocol, and that we're not all sitting at our laptops and doing focused work in an office space, which you could do remotely. Of course, if you need to do focused work in the office because you cannot do that at home, of course, the office is there for you to do that. But ultimately, driving team engagement is quite important. So the induction protocol for us it's going to be about ways of working. It is about, you know, the operational pieces, but it's also just about ways of working at the office and what does that look like for me as an individual as I go to the office, helping us relearn.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Hayley.
Any other questions for Hayley?
Hayley, just out of interest, did your data show the same need for the flexible work between genders? Did you see a greater swing between either one of them, or was everyone's need fairly similar?
I would have to deep dive that, but really what the data gave us was the ability to build personas, agnostic of gender, and so I have to remember offhand, but there were 5 personas that we built. One of them was around kind of new joiners. Another one was somebody who'd been in their career for a really long time, so close to a leadership level. There were those who were kind of mid-career. There was another one that was around carers, and I'd have to remind myself of the 5th one. But that's what the data enabled us to do, was to build the personas, less than look at that from a gender perspective. And so that's how we were building flex into the model. We didn't really, it wasn't so prominent that we actually thought that we needed to look at gender specifically. Also happy to relook at that though, Sarah.
No, interesting, thanks.
Sorry, are there any other questions for Hayley?
Call, it's Lamona again. You know, if you ask for questions, you're going to get me talking a
No,
lot. So.
It's fantastic, Lamona. That's what Hayley's here for.
Yeah. Hayley, have you, in the research and in the voices that you have collected, this phenomenon of work overload and people being more busy now in hybrid and remote work, has that come up, and what do you see, or what is the data telling us are the causes for that overload?
so Lamona, really strongly. It really comes up really, really strongly. And the number one cause is an inability to disconnect. So, you know, this merging of work as a place and an activity. We went into lockdown, we all went into kind of this full work mode, and it really just went from morning to night for many people. We then looked at it, and a lot of us looked at it and acknowledged that actually this can't continue. And so folks tried to build in interventions into the process, started to think about it a little bit differently. Leadership in organizations started to think about what are the deliberate mechanisms we can put in place to help our people disconnect a little bit more. That it's potentially a little bit better. However, it is still a strong message around this work overload, and it's largely as a result of an inability to disconnect. And I think the ability to create a little bit of distance between the home office and create a space for folks to go and work in a different space, which then says to you, okay, these might be the core hours that I need to be at the office. It still gives me the flexibility to go fetch my kids off to school, once they're done with school, and then I can go home. That might just create the breaks that people need in terms of thinking a little bit differently. The inability to disconnect is the number one piece of information that we have around work overload. And, despite all the good intentions around well-being protocols and those kinds of things, that still prevails. And I think there's still some work for us to do around that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that, Hayley, because that's certainly something that we see as well, and that we've been trying to speak to our employees about. And I agree with you 100% that we have lots of great well-being programs, but what are they actually doing if the amount of work that you have is not decreasing? Mm-hmm. So I see an interplay not just of people's inability to disconnect, but also the amount of work that is coming at people across different industries and in different companies. Right now, maybe we're trying to do more with less because of our economy, and all companies are trying to survive, and people are just grateful that they have a job, so they do whatever they need to do. But it doesn't seem like a lot of organizations are doing some proper job analysis, and work design, and thinking, is this humanly possible for a person to do? Is this humanly possible to do? So it seems like there's also that coming from the top, where corporate leaders need to rethink.
I would agree with that, Lamona. I would agree with that. Probably an oversight on my part. That's actually something that we instituted as an organization, I guess about a week and a half ago. Karen would correct me around those timelines. Also just re-looking at some of that, because I think that you're 100% right. We've, with our way of working in the pandemic, a lot of things have just kind of merged together. There's this just confluence of a number of factors, and you're 100% right. This is one of the things that we do have to look at. And of course, combined with what we're seeing in terms of this great resignation happening in a very short space of time, that compounds it. So it's really, it really is, I think, compounded at the minute. And so we do have some work to do around that, around the expectations on our people, 100%.
Hayley, we've got two more hands up. Tembisile.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Hayley, for the presentation. I'm just interested in knowing, as you were talking about the issue of work overload and the need to learn to disconnect, if the study was able to pick out if there had been an increase in the productivity levels at all with people now working remotely, but also if there'd been if the influence for people asking for a day week has to do at all with the fact that there is this overload now.
What we saw was right, and so we've run the survey a couple of times. What we saw in the first run of the survey in 2020 was that there was this massive spike in productivity, just as we all went into kind of lockdown and remote work, massive spike in productivity. Then there was a little bit of a normalization. And then upon a deep dive, I think that what you do see is that there are spikes of activity within parts of work groups versus others. And often it's around the fact that organizations have not been able to come to terms with or accommodate for the fact that some people are not able to do their work remotely. So there's an access to information criteria that inhibits people being performing at their most productive. Some people are performing at their most productive, and so therefore you might see this normalization, but that's because there is still a high spike in some areas, and then there's this kind of lower productivity value that we're seeing in other areas. So that we were able to see that as a little bit of a deep dive in the second iteration of the survey. I don't think that that's normalized necessarily. I think that we are still seeing high productivity levels. And I think what we've got to guard against is that you're not seeing that within a ring-fenced group in the business. So you're getting high productivity in some areas of your business, less so in other areas of your business. And it's a little bit misleading in terms of the information, but you've got a group of people that are then being overwhelmed by the work that they have to do. So I think, Timbisile, can you tell me your second question again, please?
I wanted to know to what extent was the need for a 4-day week influenced by the level of work or the overload in terms of work and the inability to disconnect.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know that I can answer that definitively because I don't have sufficient data to answer that definitively. What I do think, though, is it links back to this definition of flexible work and this evolving definition of flexible work. So while it may be influenced by these high levels of productivity, I think what we are going to experience is this evolving definition of flexible work. And I think that it comes more from that, with some influence from the productivity pieces, but I think it's more linked to this evolving definition of flexible work.
Thank you. Rosie.
All right, good morning, ladies, and thanks for this opportunity. Am I audible? All right, so my question is, within the context of managing a team, how one applies flexible workplace may have different nuances depending on perhaps your individual team members' needs. Mm-hmm. 3 scenarios might be, one might have, young children, newborn child or whatever. The next might be individuals who are active in sports. Mm-hmm. So, they might even be, carrying that level of significance in their sports activities as high as work activities. And another scenario might be the cost of commuting might be high for a certain individual, and the exhaustion associated with that might then, help them lean in to wanting to, become part of flexible work. How does one then as a manager respond to unique circumstances within the context that organizations need to provide a framework?
Sure. So I guess a couple of things. As an organization, you can make a choice to drive a very centralized approach and say, so this is what we've chosen to do. These are, the number of days a week, etc., and thou shalt. As an alternative, you could say, actually, this is what we believe is important for us as an organization, and that drives the outcomes that we seek to drive as an organization. We, however, are devolving that empowerment at a team level, at a management team level. Now, if you do that, then it allows you, Rosie, the opportunity to say, within my team, these are the personas that I know exist, and that's the flex that I've got to create for. So when you build that structure, you're building to create that flex. You might still say it's 2 days a week, and on the day, it's one day that we think is mandated and compulsory. It's because we're going to make that a learning day, for example. On that learning day, we have some core hours. So, and that might accommodate for the folks who are doing sport, who are going to run maybe early in the morning. Our core hours are 10 to 3, for example. Or our core hours are 9 to 2, which allows the folks who have to fetch their kids to go and fetch their kids. But what you are wanting to do is to create some flex within the management structure that empowers you to say, look, I do need you to be at work on these days because actually it's really quite important. And I acknowledge that we need some flexibility in that, and let's figure out that flexibility together. So that we're not driving what we need to drive as an organization, because look, the organization still needs to run. You know, we still need to be viable as an organization so that all of us can go to work, and that's quite important. But we do want to acknowledge our people who have actually sustained us as an organization through these very difficult times. We do want to acknowledge that and create some balance. So that might be how I would think about it, is really empowerment at a team level, which enables you to do that there. Is that helpful?
Very helpful. I think it does also, you know, need for us to kind of hear from the people that will be impacted at different levels in the organization what's important to them, so that, you know, there can be some kind of agreement among different levels of the organization at a broad strokes level as to, you know, how do you handle this scenario and that scenario, so that we don't move into a space where people think that, you know, it's a custom-made flexible work scenario for individuals. It is a business-driven framework that is leading into making accommodations in order to increase employee engagement and work-life balance. But, you know, the framework around it also needs to be clear as to, you know, at what point are you no longer serving the organization and you're serving yourself. So I think that that's going to be an interesting journey in, you know, corporates.
Look, I think that you're 100% right, and I think that you will iterate. So that's why I say test and iterate. That bottom-up information is really important. Test and iterate. And you do need something that's a framework that creates some structure, but that has some flex for the personas that you've identified. Has a little bit of flex around that. Ultimately, you know, the success of the business and the success of the people, those coming together is what is going to drive your organization going forward. And so there's, you know, test, iterate, work together to try and build in that direction.
I hear what you're saying. So in other words, there's no one framework and policy which is going to be cast in stone for the next 10 years. There needs to be a back to the drawing board review of iterations, and in so doing, then we perfect it in order to ensure that the organizational strategy can still be realized. Indeed. And listen, you know, so keep checking in on what's working, what's not working, those kinds of things. Yeah. Thank you very much.
I do see your hand, but we've got like 3 minutes left to finish off. So can I connect you to Hayley?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Is that okay, Hayley?
Yep.
Yes, yes.
Fantastic, super. Well, thank you all so much for joining us this morning, Hayley. Thank you for that wonderful, wonderful hour. I'm sure, because I know Corin said we only needed an hour, but I'm sure with the questions coming through, that engagement could have been a lot longer. So thank you so much for really very insightful information that we can all take away. To EY, Corin and Clayton, thank you once again for setting this up, and really appreciate all your support. To obviously the Africa Gender Mainstreaming Champions, EY. So thank you for that today. The next event on the 18th of November is the last event for the year. Information is on the Business Engage website. The recording for today will be on the Business Engage YouTube. So if you want any of the information, you want to go over it again, go and have a look on the Business Engage YouTube. But other than that, have an awesome day and the rest of the week, and we'll chat soon. Thanks so much, Hayley.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.